The compound was quieter without Musa. His absence was a hole that only the watchful noticed, one less shadow among the tenants, one less figure moving under Alhaji Suleiman's command. To Alhaji, it meant nothing. Tenants came and went like the seasons, another desperate man would always take Musa's place. But Mama Rukayya felt it. She had not exchanged many words with Musa, yet his presence had been steady, like a heartbeat in the background of the household. Now, in the hush of early mornings, she found herself listening for the scrape of Musa's sandals in the yard, only to hear silence. Life in the compound pressed on, heavy with Alhaji Suleiman's pride. His voice grew louder with each passing week, boasting of his wealth, his allies, his grip on the council, and his power over the men and women who depended on him for shelter. His arrogance demanded an audience, and so he gathered relatives, friends, and favored tenants in the great hall for another of his feasts. That evening, the hall glowed with lanterns and echoed with laughter. Tenants and guests sat cross-legged around steaming bowls of rice and meat. Alhaji, seated like a king at the head, filled the air with stories of his triumphs, puffed with self-importance. Then, in a flourish of drunken arrogance, he turned on his wife. "Mama Rukayya," he declared loudly, slapping the table, "this woman cannot even keep the simplest accounts without error. I give her money for the market, and she returns with excuses. Tell me, is that a wife or a child?" Laughter rolled through the hall. Some men clapped their thighs, others shook their heads in mock disapproval. Even the tenants, seated at the edges of the room, forced nervous smiles, fearful of appearing unsympathetic. Mama Rukayya lowered her gaze. Her face was calm, lips pressed into a thin line, yet her stillness was not the stillness of obedience. It was the stillness of stone before it cracks. Alhaji, pleased with himself, leaned back. A woman should know her place. Quiet, obedient, and grateful. Is that not so? Again the hall erupted in laughter, voices echoing off the mud walls. But in that moment, Mama Rukayya's silence hardened into something sharper. Her hands gripped the arm of her chair until her knuckles turned pale. Her eyes, though cast downward, burned with a fire that no one else dared meet. Among all those who laughed that night, no one sensed the shift, no one except Mama Rukayya herself. Something within her had moved, something years of endurance could no longer contain. It was the beginning of her quiet rebellion, though the compound had not yet heard its first whisper. Lagos roads had never felt so heavy beneath Musa's tires. Before the eviction, his one-room apartment in Alhaji Suleiman's compound had been a small anchor. A place to drop his helmet, wipe the dust from his face, and let his bones rest before the next day's hustle. But now, each evening bled into the next with nowhere to land. Musa still rode for the logistics company. At dawn, he strapped on his helmet, mounted the company's red motorcycle, and merged into the city's madness. He knew every shortcut in Rukayya, every traffic choke along 3rd Mainland, every LASTMA checkpoint where bribes were hinted with casual shrugs. He knew the smell of petrol fumes that clung to his clothes, and the way rain turned the expressway into a death trap. Yet since the eviction, the work felt different. Every delivery carried a weight he couldn't shake. When he stopped at offices in Victoria Island, handing over parcels to receptionists in air-conditioned lobbies, he couldn't stop thinking, "These people will go home tonight. Where will I go?" At night, he drifted between places. Sometimes he squeezed into the mechanic's workshop where his friend Bubba allowed him a bench. Other nights, when the workshop was locked, he dozed at a filling station, sitting upright on his bike until the attendants chased him off. Sleep came in broken fragments, the whine of mosquitoes and the growl of engines in his ears. Still, Musa kept working. His supervisors praised him for punctuality. Clients liked his politeness, the way he greeted them with a nod even when sweat dripped from his chin. But behind the mask of professionalism, his body was unraveling. His eyes grew hollow from exhaustion, and his back ached from carrying both the weight of parcels and the memory of his belongings ruined in the rain. The city swallowed his pain, as it always did. To the streets of Lagos, Musa was just another rider weaving through danfos and trailers, part of the endless swarm. But inside him, something was hardening. Each insult from drivers who cut him off, each pothole that jolted his spine, each long ride under scorching sun only deepened the quiet fire lit by Alhaji Suleiman's betrayal. What Musa didn't yet know was that this new resilience, this stubborn survival, would soon pull him back toward the compound, not as a tenant begging for shelter, but as a man fate was preparing for something larger. Back inside the compound, life wore its usual mask. Tenants fetched water, children played in the dust, and Alhaji Suleiman moved like a king in his domain. Yet behind the walls of his renovated flat, cracks had begun to widen. Mama Rukayya had lived too many years swallowing her husband's arrogance, but the humiliation had become harder to ignore. She still dressed in fine lace, still scolded Tenant's children when they wandered too close, but bitterness curled under her voice. The women of the compound whispered about her daughter, Samira, and their whispers reached her ears no matter how much she pretended otherwise. The last proposal that had come for Samira ended in disgrace. A well-to-do businessman from Surulere had visited, speaking warmly, promising stability. Within weeks, he sent word through his family that the marriage could not go ahead. The reason? The girl is not disciplined. That single sentence clung to Mama Rukayya like smoke she could not wash away. In private, her quarrels with Alhaji grew sharper. She accused him of indulging Samira, of letting her roam the city at odd hours, of using Tenant's rent to fund his endless gambling nights while their daughter's future rotted. He silenced her with the same weapons he always used: threats, dismissive laughter, the heavy hand of authority. One evening, after another of their arguments, Alhaji's anger boiled into cruelty. He stood before her in the living room, prayer beads dangling, his voice loud enough for Samira to hear from her room. "Woman, keep your mouth shut. If not for me, you would still be hawking groundnuts by the roadside. Do not forget your place." The words struck harder than any slap. Mama Rukayya froze, humiliated, her pride shredded in her own house. She said nothing, but in her chest something shifted. That night, as she lay awake listening to the rain against the zinc, she thought of all the secrets she carried. The late-night footsteps of her husband sneaking toward other women's rooms, the money he hid in fake accounts, the council officials he bribed, the very receipt he had ordered Samira to destroy. For years she had held her silence, wearing it like a chain. But now, humiliation had burned through restraint. For the first time, Mama Rukayya wondered what would happen if those secrets escaped her lips. And while Musa rode across Lagos the next morning, weaving through traffic, exhausted but unbroken, a storm was quietly brewing in the very house that had cast him out. Musa's days blurred into one another: traffic, deliveries, hunger, exhaustion. But Lagos, for all its cruelty, sometimes rewarded the stubborn. Little by little, Musa began to notice how his honesty and patience set him apart in a city where shortcuts were the rule. One morning, he delivered a package to a law office on Broad Street. The secretary, a sharp-tongued woman with a habit of snapping at writers, was unusually gentle with Musa. He realized it was because the week before, he had returned a client's forgotten phone without asking for something small. In a city where most people looked out only for themselves, Musa's quiet integrity had left its mark. Another day, in Surulere, an elderly woman selling a car near a busy junction stopped him. "Writer," she called, holding out a steaming ball of fried bean cake wrapped in paper. "Take. I see how you pass every day, never disturbing anybody. May God bless your hustle." Musa accepted it with both hands, gratitude warming him more than the food itself. Even his supervisor at the logistics company began to notice. "Musa, you're not like the others," the man said one evening. "You don't argue with clients, you don't cheat on fuel allowance. If you keep this up, maybe I can put in a word when we need a senior writer." It was not much, just words, a snack, a nod of respect, but for Musa, these small kindnesses were proof that he was not invisible, not completely crushed. They were reminders that even without a home, his dignity had not drowned in the rain. Still, every night when he parked his bike and laid his head wherever he could, the memory of Alhaji's compound returned. He thought of the tenants who kept silent, of Samira's mocking laughter, of the kaftan-clad man with prayer beads who had destroyed him with a smile. And though Musa said nothing to anyone, a quiet vow formed inside him: one day, truth would have its turn. In the compound, Mama Rukayya moved like a shadow. Outwardly, she was the same sharp-tongued matriarch, scolding children who played too loudly and overseeing the compound chores. But inside, she was calculating. Humiliation had lit a fire she could not put out, and now every gesture, every silence, carried a hidden edge. Her first act was subtle: she began keeping records. Whenever tenants whispered about the extra levies Alhaji demanded, she wrote them down in a small notebook hidden beneath her wrapper cloths. When he collected rent and pocketed half without issuing receipts, she took note of the dates. She remembered the names of men who visited late at night, leaving before dawn. These were things she had once ignored or quietly explained away. Now, she was building a private archive of his sins. But secrecy needed testing. One evening, while sitting with Auntie Bissy, the neighbor most people dismissed as a gossip, Mama Rukayya let her tongue slip. She said, shaking her head. A landlord who spends more time at gambling dens than with his family. I wonder what kind of example that sets for his daughter. Auntie Bissy's eyes widened. Ah, Mama Rukayya, you of all people saying this? Mama Rukayya smiled faintly and changed the subject. But in her chest, she felt the thrill of it, the first time she had let her husband's disgrace taste daylight. Samira, meanwhile, grew more reckless. She disappeared for nights at a time, coming home with perfume that wasn't hers, her eyes daring anyone to question her. When Mama Rukayya tried to scold her, the girl snapped back, "Is Baba not worse? At least I do not gamble away the rent." The words struck, but instead of silencing her mother, they hardened her resolve. If her daughter could see Alhaji's hypocrisy, then perhaps the rest of the world needed to see it too. Alhaji himself remained blind to the shifting ground beneath his feet. He strutted through the compound, collecting respect with the arrogance of a man convinced he was untouchable. He did not notice that his wife's silences were no longer submission, but strategy. And so, the walls of his kingdom remained outwardly solid, while inside, one woman quietly prepared to bring them down. Musa's days followed the rhythm of Lagos, horns blaring, engines roaring, dust rising. Yet beneath the monotony, change was quietly taking root. Hardship was sculpting him, shaping muscles of patience and discipline that comfort had never offered. He no longer wasted time lamenting the room he had lost in the compound. Instead, his mind calculated routes faster, his hands steadied on the handlebars through rain and wind, and his eyes sharpened to read the city's moods. He became known among fellow riders as the one who never complained, even when soaked to the bone. At a busy office in Victoria Island, a young intern once asked him, "Oga, why you always dey calm? These other riders dey shout, dey curse. But you, nah, like nothing dey touch you." Musa had only smiled, though inside he thought, if you have slept on a cold bench with mosquitoes buzzing in your ears, no insult can shake you. It was not just the work. In the evenings, when he managed to find a quiet corner near the bus park, Musa began reading from a battered book he carried in his backpack, How to Write a Winning Proposal. He had picked it up from a roadside vendor for 200 naira, curious. The words opened new corridors in his mind. He underlined passages, whispering them to himself in the dim light. Though he was only a dispatch rider, Musa felt something stir. One day, he thought, this hustle will not end with me dodging trailers. One day, I will write my own way out. Meanwhile, the memory of the compound never left him. Each time he saw landlords arguing with tenants at delivery stops, he remembered Alhaji's smile as he ordered their eviction. Each time he passed a house where a family shared laughter under the yellow glow of a bulb, he felt the ache of displacement. But Musa was no longer broken. He was becoming tempered steel, bent, battered, but sharper for it. And while he forged this resilience on the streets, Mama Rukayya's quiet rebellion inside the compound was gathering momentum, unnoticed by the man they both would one day confront. Mama Rukayya's days had become a balancing act. To the tenants, she still carried herself with the authority of the landlord's wife, but inside she was quietly gathering weapons. Her notebook of secrets was filling, dates, names, and details no one else bothered to remember. But a notebook hidden under wrappers was not enough. Secrets needed ears. One humid afternoon, she left the compound under the pretense of visiting her cousin in Ojuelegba. Instead, she walked to the small office of Malam Sani, a retired clerk she had known for years. Malam Sani was a wiry man with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, known in the neighborhood for helping people write petitions or letters to government offices. She sat across from him, her voice low. "Malam, tell me, if a man has been cheating tenants, collecting rent without record, and bribing officials, can anything be done?" The old clerk leaned back, squinting. "Depends. If there is proof, you can scatter his name. Even bring him before the local council. But why do you ask? Whose fight are you fighting?" Mama Rukayya hesitated. To reveal too much would be dangerous, but silence would get her nowhere. Let's just say, it is someone who has grown too proud. Someone who believes no one can touch him. Malam Sani chuckled, shaking his head. "Ah, pride. It is always the rope men use to hang themselves. If you are serious, bring me what you have. But be careful, people who carry secrets also carry knives." She left the office with her heart pounding. For the first time, she had voiced aloud what had only lived in her thoughts. It felt dangerous, yes, but also liberating. Back in the compound, Alhaji returned that evening in high spirits, prayer beads swinging. announcing that he had won small something at the gambling table. He did not notice the way his wife's eyes lingered on him, cool and calculating. He did not see that the woman who once defended him was now quietly plotting his undoing. The rains had started again, Lagos skies heavy with gray clouds that threatened to burst at any moment. Musa zipped through traffic, his raincoat flapping, weaving past danfos and impatient kiki riders. The city was chaos, but Musa had learned how to dance through it. That afternoon, he was sent to deliver a parcel to a mid-sized tech company in Yaba. Normally, such jobs were routine: sign, stamp, collect, leave. But this time, the manager himself came down to meet him. A tall man in glasses, he asked Musa to wait a moment while he searched for a missing invoice. Musa stood quietly by the desk, helmet tucked under his arm. His eyes wandered over the office walls where motivational posters hung: innovation, integrity, growth. He thought of the book he'd been reading at night, How to Write a Winning Proposal, and almost smiled at the coincidence. The manager returned, sighing. "Ah, Musa, thank you for your patience. Most writers would have started shouting by now." Musa only shrugged. "Work na work, sir." The man studied him for a moment, then said, "You're with Swift Dispatch, right? I've seen you here before. You always deliver on time." He paused, then lowered his voice. "I might need someone reliable for personal errands, things I don't trust just anybody with. If you're interested, I can pay you directly." It was not a full escape from his struggle, but it was something. A door cracking open where he had thought there were only walls. Musa accepted politely, hiding the excitement that surged in his chest. That evening, when he bought a kara from the same woman in Surulere, he allowed himself an extra piece. It was a small celebration, but it tasted sweeter than anything he had eaten in weeks. Still, as he lay down later on the mechanic's bench, staring at the ceiling in the dim light, the compound drifted back into his thoughts. No matter how far the roads carried him, the memory of Alhaji's voice, calm, smiling, cruel, never truly left. And somewhere across Lagos, Mama Rukayya was sharpening her weapons in silence. The compound still breathed with its usual noise: children's laughter, clattering buckets at the well, radios spilling news from cracked speakers. But beneath that familiar rhythm, a quiet shift was happening. Mama Rukayya had grown bolder. Her notebook of secrets was no longer just for herself. One evening, after making sure Alhaji had left for his gambling hunt, she invited Auntie Bissy into her sitting room. The woman came eagerly, expecting gossip. Instead, she was shown something far heavier. "Read this," Mama Rukayya said, sliding the small book across the table. Auntie Bissy squinted, her eyes widening as she traced the neat handwriting. January 14th, rent collected from Block C, Flat 3. No receipt issued, money hidden in green Kobo tin. Another page, March 3rd, envelope passed to council official under cover of evening prayer. She looked up, her mouth open. "Ha, Mama Rukayya, do you know what you are holding? If this thing enters the wrong hand, Alhaji is finished." Mama Rukayya's lips tightened. Maybe that is what should happen. The neighbor gasped, half in shock, half in delight. "But, are you not his wife?" Her voice dropped, firm and cold. "A man who humiliates his wife in front of her child, who spends rent money on gambling while tenants suffer, is that a husband? I have carried his shame long enough." Later that week, one of the tenants found a folded note slipped under his door. It contained details of how Alhaji had inflated his rent and pocketed the extra. No name was signed, but the handwriting was steady, deliberate. The whispers began again, stronger this time. "Our landlord is cheating us," some muttered at the well. "How can we pay so much when others in the area pay less?" Alhaji, still lost in his false sense of power, heard none of it. He strutted through the compound as usual, oblivious to the quiet fire smoldering in corners. But Mama Rukayya knew. For the first time in years, she felt a strange kind of freedom. She had released one arrow, and it had flown true. More would follow, and somewhere on the streets of Lagos, Musa's path was bending closer, unknowingly toward the same storm that was about to consume the compound. It had been months since Musa last saw the compound. In that time, Lagos had battered him, starved him, tested him, but it had also given him a harder spine and a steadier gaze. On a humid Thursday afternoon, his supervisor handed him a parcel. "Take this to Alhaji Suleiman's compound. You know the place?" Musa froze for a heartbeat. He knew the place too well. His mind flashed to the day his belongings had been dumped into the rain, to Samira's mocking laughter, to the landlord's calm cruelty. The scar of humiliation throbbed in his chest. Still, he only nodded. I know it. The ride back was heavy. Each street, each bend of the road felt like a path into memory. By the time he rolled into the familiar dusty courtyard, children were still running, women still gossiping by the well, but the air was different. He could feel it in the way tenants glanced at one another, the way their voices dropped as Alhaji passed. Musa parked his bike and walked to the door, helmet in hand. The moment was surreal, returning not as a tenant, but as a rider in uniform, bearing a sealed envelope. Inside the compound, Mama Rukayya sat by the window. When she saw him, her heart jolted. Musa, the quiet boy her husband had humiliated, the one whose pain had mirrored her own, was standing at the gate again. Alhaji, oblivious as always, came out to collect the parcel. He did not even recognize Musa at first. To him, riders were faceless. But Mama Rukayya's gaze lingered, her mind racing. Here he is, the one who knows what it means to be cast aside. For a brief moment, their eyes met, Musa and Mama Rukayya. Nothing was spoken, yet something passed between them. Recognition, shared grievance, the faint outline of an alliance neither had imagined before. Musa left without a word, the parcel delivered. But as he rode away, his chest felt tight. Something told him this was not the last time he would be drawn back into that compound. And for Mama Rukayya, watching his bike disappear down the road, a thought flickered. Perhaps fate has just returned me an ally. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe and share for more.